Welcome to United Way of Southeast Louisiana's Public Policy Educational Session 2. This session will focus on government leaders and domestic violence. Good afternoon. I'm Todd Batiste. I serve as Senior Vice President for Education and Youth Initiatives. I will be your host for today's program as we get started. I'd like to clarify a few housekeeping rules. This session will be recorded and shared with all registrants. There will be time for questions and discussion at the end of the program. Please share your questions using the chat function. I will now hand the program over to Ron McClain. Ron is the Executive Director of the Institute for Mental Hygiene of the City of New Orleans. He has more than 30 years of experience in social service administration and university teaching in the field. Ron currently serves as United Way of Southeast Louisiana's Public Policy Committee Chair. Please join me in welcoming my friend and colleague, Ron McClain.
Todd, thanks so much, Todd. I'm really pleased to serve as a member of the Board of Trustees of the United Way of Southeast Louisiana, and also obviously as chairman of the Public Policy Committee. I'd like to thank all the participants for joining us today. You may ask, why is United Way of Southeast Louisiana hosting these sessions? Well, every year, United Way of Southeast Louisiana creates an agenda outlining our priority public policy issues in health, education, financial stability, and community strengthening, and preparation for the start of each state legislative session. United Way's legislative agenda advances our fight to eradicate poverty in Southeast Louisiana through the Blueprint for Prosperity. We do this by supporting ALICE families, those who are asset limited, income constrained, employed. These are households who are struggling, the working poor who are really struggling. We focus strongly on public policy because it's one of the most effective ways to drive the systems level change that our community so desperately needs. These educational sessions allow our Public Policy Committee to gain insight from experts on key public policy issues and develop a comprehensive legislative agenda. We also collect information on the legislative priorities of United Way's community impact partners. These partners provide critical on-the-ground services to vulnerable populations across Southeast Louisiana. It is now my great honor to welcome today's esteemed panelists, Judge David Matlock, Secretary of the Louisiana Department of Children and Family Services, Dr. Jenna Chiasson with the Louisiana Department of Education, and Mariah Wineski with the Louisiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I'm now pleased to introduce to you Michael Williamson, the CEO of the United Way of Southeast Louisiana. Michael will frame today's presentation by providing you an overview of the ALICE households in Southeast Louisiana. Please join me in welcoming Michael Williamson.
Well, thanks, Ron, and good morning, everyone. Let me start by offering a few thanks. Special thanks to Charmaine, Cassiopeia, and Pam Allison, and members of our marketing team for pulling these sessions together. We've been doing these for a number of years. We found these instrumental in helping our board form a legislative agenda. And I want to thank Ron as a personal friend, a member of our board of trustees, chairman of the Public Policy Committee, but also board chairman-elect for the United Way Southeast Louisiana Board of Trustees. So thank you, Ron. As you heard from Ron, he briefly introduced you to ALICE, but let me reintroduce you to ALICE and remind us all that ALICE is more than an acronym. ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed, but it's also maybe a relative or a friend. You may be ALICE, folks that are listening to this webinar today. ALICE, they're cashiers, waiters, childcare providers, and other members of our essential workforce. And as Ron noted, Alice earns just above the federal poverty level, which we might say is somewhat antiquated, but less than what it takes to make ends meet. A little more about Alice. Alice or the struggling households are forced to make really, really tough decisions every day. And while such a hardship is pervasive, I would be remiss if I did not point out that households of color are disproportionately Alice. But Alice also represents the data reshaping the dialogue around financial hardship and a grassroots movement that is picking up steam in 30 US states and counting. Let's talk a bit about Alice in Louisiana. Over time, we're seeing these trends. One, the cost of living has increased more for Alice households than overall inflation as measured by the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Consumer Price Index. Worker vulnerability is increased with the growth in low-wage jobs and more fluctuations in hours, schedules, and benefits while their wages remain stagnant. And also, we've seen the number of Alice households increased, and while the percentages of households in poverty in Alice remain flat in 2021 due largely to pandemic aid that has yet to expire, the new data shows us that the number of households living under the Alice threshold is already increasing. And we anticipate that number to only grow in our next report release, which will conclude 2023 data. And once again, will underscore that pandemic aid has expired and inflation continues to grapple our nation. I'll talk more broadly about Louisiana. It's sad to note, but important to note that Louisiana has the second highest Alice rate in the nation, with 51% of households living below the Alice threshold, only behind Mississippi. And here in Southeast Louisiana, in 2021, 49% of Southeast Louisiana households had income below the Alice threshold, meaning once again, they were unable to afford even the most basic of survival budgets. And so pandemic supports moved Alice households above the threshold, but that expiring aid will leave thousands of families in Southeast Louisiana in a financial crisis. I want to talk just a second before I give it back to Ron. Let's talk about equity for Alice. We believe that creating equity for Alice means illustrating how barriers by race, ethnicity, age, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, zip code, health, ability, veteran status, and/or immigration status limits life outcomes, and working to remove those barriers so that all people can fully participate in all aspects of our social and economic systems is a real practice of equity. Now, through this series of educational sessions, we strive to recognize and document the role of structural inequities in the lives of Alice families by doing a few things. First, using the best possible data to show where opportunity is and is not available, where it is easiest to fall into hardship, and what structural changes are needed to make Alice individuals, households, and communities safer and more secure. And also by holding ourselves accountable and taking an equity-centered approach in our work and calling attention to any actions that run counter to our efforts. And being intentionally inclusive in widening the diversity of the network of collaborators in our communities without overburdening any one particular group. And last but not least, importance of this call today, advocating for Alice by providing research and data to inform strategies and solutions to assist those who are struggling financially to make ends meet, by shining a light on racist and discriminatory systems and policies in order to affect that change. And all of this with the ultimate goal of making sure all Alice households have everything they need to live and thrive in this new and modern economy. Thank you for your time. And Mr. Chairman, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks so much, Michael, for sharing this most important information about a significant number of struggling families in our community and our state of Louisiana. When you think about 51% of families not meeting the Alice threshold, it means that we have work to do. And obviously part of it is our policy advocacy. And I'm so happy today that we have significant policymakers who've joined us. I want to thank Judge Matlock for his willingness to join us in this so early in his tenure. And it's really important that for us at least, that we thank you, Judge, for your willingness to be here, and also for sharing information and being willing to listen to us and other policymakers about important issues for the children that you're responsible for, very vulnerable children in the child welfare system. So it's now my pleasure to introduce you, Judge, our first panelist. Judge Matlock was appointed Secretary of the Department of Children and Family Services this year. Judge Matlock previously served as Chief Judge of the Juvenile Court for Caddo Parish from 1999 until his recent retirement in 2023. He was first elected to serve as judge in 1994. Please join me in welcoming Judge David Matlock.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all. My name is David Matlock. I really prefer David. And
Okay.
so, you know, I'm a recovering judge. Let me let me leave it at that. I think one of the things y'all wanted to hear about is my vision for the department. We have 3 primary missions. If you walk in this building right outside my elevator, anywhere, you'll see the mission, the 3 missions that are the primary missions that we have. Number 1 is to help protect children in Louisiana from abuse and neglect by their parents and caretakers. Number 2 is to help individuals and families become self-sufficient. That's the mission there. And then 3rd is to help protect the citizens of Louisiana, the residents of Louisiana, from in disasters, particularly mass disaster type situations, group shelters and so forth. We work with the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, but it's a big part of what we do in terms of running shelters, during mass emergencies. And we intersect with y'all probably in every one of those areas to one extent or another, but helping individuals and families become self-sufficient is one of our major areas of intersection with y'all. And I think one of the major topics, certainly it involves Alice. We were having some informal discussions, or I was mainly just kind of talking a lot as before we started. One of the things that I have known historically, DCFS has deep ingrained systemic issues, and there may be some of y'all that are not aware of that, but if you are, you really haven't intersected a lot with child welfare, is what I mean. It's well known, and certainly those of y'all that are from the region that y'all cover understand there have been some particular problems, some relatively high profile problems, which are symptomatic of deeper, more ubiquitous issues that run throughout the state that may not be as high profile, but are deep systemic issues. For the most part, those are driven in the terms of child welfare. Those are driven, and by child welfare, I'm kind of focusing on that abuse and neglect aspect of what we do, as opposed to the self-sufficiency and the emergency preparedness aspects of what we do. But that child welfare area has largely been driven because that is the most state general fund paid for part of our programming. Emergency preparedness, a lot of that is FEMA money, federal pass-throughs. You can save money there, and we still should be good stewards of every dollar, whether it's federal or state. But it is not an area that can be raided, scavenged, pillaged to promote other programming or shiny things or even essential things. Emergency preparedness, you can't use that FEMA money or those dedicated funds for things other than emergency preparedness. And in the family support area, again, that's that self-sufficiency and family sufficiency missional aspect. Those are largely federal reimbursed. SNAP benefits, FITAP, kinship subsidies, disability determinations. A lot of that is 100% federally reimbursed. If I save money there, I can't use it for things outside of that. Still, there's a duty to be good stewards, be efficient, do it right. And there are processes that contribute to us being able to audit and monitor that. But you can't go in and take money there and use it outside. Well, child welfare, there's a lot of state general funds. And for the last 20 years, we have been pulling money out of there. And we created kind of a bit of a death spiral, not a bit, a death spiral, a toxic movement downward where we need to hire 300 more people. We might have 100 vacancies. These are numbers just for discussion purposes. And we have those vacancies because 20 years ago, if you got an internship with DCFS, that as a social worker, that was a plum position. That's what you wanted. Today, talk to the young students in social work. Yeah. It's not. And so we've created this work environment, morale issue that, and I'm not being very succinct on this, and I'll try to backtrack just a little bit. Our caseloads in certain areas, child welfare investigations, foster care case management, probably should be 10, sometimes, 8, 12. Exactly. They're certain for certain areas. We have a situation where somebody's caseload was 140. Now, that is a person who willingly went to school, willingly said, I can make more money doing other things, lots of other things. This is where my heart wants to be. This is my calling. This is where I'm supposed to be. So I go into child welfare. Their caseload should be 10. Their caseload's 140. Their heart was in this, but their heart is now broken because they cannot do their job. And so we lose them. It's not because they're a bad person. It's because they're a great person. And they cannot continue to function. And so that has resulted in this death spiral. I came in saying compensation. We need more payment for these people. And we do. And I would say, and caseloads. We all knew caseloads were a problem. Now I'm saying caseloads, and compensation, and a healthy, wholesome workplace, a building that is clean, that is relatively nice, well cared for, well painted, a place where children and parents can come in and visit in a cheerful way. Well, go into some of our local offices. I invite you to come in. I'll go with you if my schedule allows, and if it's reasonably local, my schedule will allow it. And I've done this. I mean, I've been to Bon Carré here in Baton Rouge at least 3 times. I can remember off the top of my head, and South Ardenwood multiple times, visited with children there, visited in local congregate facilities, because I'm too granular. I mean, I am too granular. I cannot help it. It's who I am, and I'm gonna be in the weeds in child welfare, because that's the best way you learn. If you want to learn about what it's like to be a foster child, go talk to a 22-year-old who has come out of foster care. If you want to know what it's like to be a foster parent, go talk to a foster parent. You can talk to a judge, but we don't know. We appreciate, we love, but we don't know. So if you really want to know where the problems are, same thing with caseworkers. So visit with caseworkers. What do y'all need? We need manageable caseloads. We need reasonable compensation. We need a nice workplace. We need a vehicle that's not a 2001 or a 2003 vehicle that is on its last leg or wheel. Recruitment, funding. I've got a $35 million internal fiscal cliff that we need to hire more child well workers, again, because of this scavenging of those funds over the last few years. That doesn't leave me money for shiny things. It doesn't leave me money for a lot of substantive, desirable, necessary, seemingly things. But sometimes the main thing is keeping the main thing. And until we can pull the yoke up and get this on at least a level flight and maybe a slightly upward flight in terms of those general morale and malaise issues, morale more so though, issues. And we won't know that we've pulled out of that spiral until 6 months, 12 months after that's happened. We won't feel it in real time. We will be able to look back and say, you know, that's where we might have turned a corner. That's where we began pulling up, but the job won't be over at that point. And so it's a real challenge. My vision for the department has to do with morale, has to do largely with the recruitment, and really, that's not the right word. It's the engagement, support, and communication with foster parents. Years ago, we would talk about, well, we need more money to recruit foster parents. And I would get on a soapbox and I would say the best way, first of all, we can't recruit foster parents. The only real significant recruiters of foster parents are other foster parents. And the way to recruit foster parents that you don't have is to treat the foster parents that you do have with respect, appreciation, good communication, inclusion, and engagement. And unless and until you do that, you are not, and y'all who follow this, you will understand that a lot of our problems with children living in a state office, I have a child in a state office right now. We've got children in congregate facilities that could be placed in a foster family home. And to do that, you have to be engaged in an active effort, a systemic effort to engage, support, listen to, encourage foster parents, and to build local networks of support among the faith community, among businesses, among charitable organizations, among for-profit organizations, for that matter, to support. Who doesn't want to help foster parents and foster children? And a lot of times we don't know how to do that. And foster parents generally are not the kind of people who ask for help. If you want to bring them a meal, and if you say, what do you need? Well, they'll say, pray for us or think about us. But guess what? A meal or getting a social or charitable or faith organization that you're involved with to do a parents' night out. And we've done that in Shreveport. I have seen an organic neural network where they meet monthly. It involves DCFS folks. It involves the faith community. It involves foster parents. It involves charitable organizations, and it involves others. And they meet together once a month. But guess what? When they're not meeting, they have email chains. I'm on it. I might get an email saying, I hadn't got one in a little while. I'm scared they clean me off their list, maybe because of my new position. I need to say, I'm still, but they'll say, we need a bunk bed. We need a backpack. We need a child seat, car seat. We need, such and such. And they've got foster closets. And I mean, I know other areas of the state have done that and probably do some aspects of that better than others. James Samaritan, the other centers that are the sort of foster closet, but it's not really foster closet because a lot of this is kinship and even bio parents. Other states do that, but that is a big support for foster parents. So building that network where foster parents know that they can go, they can be supported, and that if encouraging the folks in their community to not wait for a foster parent to say, I need help, because you'll be waiting all day. They're not going to say that. You've got to reach out to them. And so it's kind of incumbent. So we've started a kind of a mass initiative willy-nilly, because it kind of comes from a little bit me. So there's some chaos, but we've got great administrators here that my executive manager. I finally figured out the other day who she's managing. It's me. But I literally stopped this morning and prayed for and thank God for her. That's Melissa Horton, who Charmaine, I think, has probably interacted with. I didn't know her from Adam a month and a half ago. I couldn't, I mean, and that's not an exception. I mean, but she is helping me organize this effort where we've got several meetings coming up focused on the East Baton Rouge area. If y'all are familiar with that area, that's in y'all's footprint, I would assume. We know we have problems here, and so we're having virtual meetings, we're having in-person meetings, and as I explained to somebody who couldn't make one of these meetings, I said it's not about the meeting, it's about the process. This is not a one and done thing. This is about creating this neural network, this relationship built network in our community. I've involved some folks from Shreveport because we know we've got some things up there, but I know that those things can do better. And this is not, when you do the beta, it's never going to be as good as the next one, right? Whether it's software or whether it's our programming. So maybe, and I think Baton Rouge shouldn't be the caboose, it should be the flagship, to mix my transportation metaphors there, among engaging, recruiting foster parents. I think I'm beyond my time, and I don't want to keep talking because frankly, I'd like to learn a little bit by listening to y'all.
I was getting ready to put the 2-minute sign up.
Okay. I don't know what I want to say in terms of wrapping up. I want to be able to participate as long as I can and listen. So I'm here. And if I have to leave, I have to leave, but I'm trying not to. So thank y'all.
David, thanks for sharing such important information, somewhat sobering, but also your vision. When you talk about the missions for the department, and remind us that it's about helping to protect children from abuse and neglect in their homes from family members, household members, help to ensure self-sufficiency for families, and obviously to help respond to disasters. You talked at length about the challenges with the funding for the first mission around protecting children in their home, and the god-awful caseloads for social workers. You mentioned 140 people on a caseload,
and that's an exception.
It should be 10.
Yeah, 100.
David.
That's an extreme example, but I can tell you there are lots of examples that are twice, 3 times, 4 times what they ought to be, and then you lose people, and that caseload has to go to somebody else. We have supervisors working down a level. We have and you can't supervise if you're working your own caseload. So people
yeah. So we just wanted to kind of highlight some of what you're saying and also indicate, our support for your vision of dealing with the morale issues, dealing with the caseloads, and certainly increasing compensation. And you talked about how important it is to engage and support and communicate with foster parents, treat them right. So David, thanks so much for sharing this helpful information and also for engaging the United Way of Southeast Louisiana as a partner. Thanks again for being
Thank you.
so candid,
can I have 10 more seconds?
Yes, 10 seconds.
I didn't say much about workforce development. It's huge. I'm interested in pathways out of poverty instead of pathways into poverty. Workforce development, dealing with the benefit cliffs that I talked about before we kind of got together here, and other similar issues that are designed to have off-ramps from poverty is a huge deal, and that is an area where we intersect. And I'll be quiet.
Thanks, David. Stay tuned for us to join you in negotiating those challenges, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of advance some strategies that have been effective on a national level. So we want to be partners and want to be engaged with you. And it's now my honor to introduce to you Dr. Jenna Chiasson. Dr. Chiasson served as the Deputy Superintendent of Teaching and Learning for Louisiana's Department of Education. During her tenure in this role, Dr. Chiasson led support for educators and families through the pandemic that minimized learning loss and led to students' growth on the NAEP for Louisiana's approximately 800,000 students. She has collaborated with policymakers, industry partners, and education leaders to transform early literacy instructions across almost 200 school systems. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jenna Chiasson.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank y'all for having me. Happy to be with y'all. Happy Friday, everyone. We are not a new administration here at the Department of Education. I actually joined the agency back in June of 2020 alongside our state superintendent, Dr. Cade Brumley. I'm happy to be here today. On his behalf, we have been working tirelessly over the last few years to ensure that every child in our state begins their educational experience gaining the tools that they need to graduate from high school and succeed in a rapidly changing world. So though we're not a new administration, we do have a mostly new board. We have 8 out of 11 new BESE members, the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. And so it's been a great opportunity for us to reset with our new board and identify several priority areas. So I'd like to really just spend a few minutes walking through some of those key priority areas for us as an agency working alongside BESE, and some things that we really hope to accomplish and narrow in on over the next several years. We are a birth through 12th grade agency, which I think sometimes that is a misnomer in our state. Folks think of us as K-12 education, but we actually also have early childhood within the Department of Education. And so our first agency priority is focused on early childhood leading to kindergarten readiness. We know that research tells us that children who are exposed to high quality early childhood experiences will perform drastically better in kindergarten than those children who aren't exposed to those high quality early learning experiences. So we recognize the importance of this. So we will continue to support early learning educators in their efforts to prepare children for kindergarten. We have been successful in expanding state funding for early childhood care and education over the past several years. And we also receive annual federal funding, mostly for our child care assistance program that supports families in paying for care when they're working or they're in school full time. We've also been working really hard to improve the health, safety, and quality of early childhood education settings, and we've been able to really make some strides in those areas. But as an agency, we are committed to expanding access for early childhood care and ensuring the families that we do serve through our early childhood programs are truly served well by a program that is accessible and meets their needs so that they are able to go to work, to attend school, to make a life that is better for themselves and their children. And so we take that commitment and that responsibility very seriously in our early childhood programs to make sure they are healthy, safety, and high quality learning environments for the families that are served. Our next agency priority is around literacy and literacy instruction aligned specifically to the science of reading. So over the last several years, we've been successful in passing a number of legislation around literacy. And so we've been able to do a lot of work in just a few years' time. One of the things that I think has had the largest impact in our state was legislation passed several years ago requiring all of our kindergarten through 3rd grade teachers and leaders to attend a mandatory required training around the science of reading. And so this is really about arming our educators with the capacity to teach reading in a way that is scientifically researched and based and really addresses the needs of learners with that systematic phonics instruction. And so I think that has already had a large impact on us as a state. We've seen some growth in our English language arts scores in those early grade levels. We've also experienced growth in NAEP, which is the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And so we've also experienced the highest growth in 4th grade reading out of any state in the country. And so we're really excited about this initial progress. We know we have lots more work to do in early literacy specifically, but we are definitely hopeful that we are headed in the right direction and have some of the pieces of policy in place and are focusing in on quality implementation of that policy. We've also been able to implement a universal literacy screener for kindergarten through 3rd grade students. And so for the first time ever this school year, all of the students in our state attending public and public charter schools were screened in early literacy to identify any deficits in their skills, but also to tell educators and families exactly where the children are in their literacy journey. And so we were really happy to be able to implement this universal literacy screener at the beginning of the year, another check at the middle of the year, and then students will be screened again at the end of this school year. So that gives us a really good look as a state of our kindergarten through third graders, but also gives really important, vital information to the educators doing the work in classrooms every day. And I think really importantly too, lets families know where their children are in regards to reading and learning how to read. And I always say that it's too late by the time a child is at the end of third grade and they take our state assessment for the first time for a family to then find out that their child can't read. And so this literacy screener has been huge. It's been a massive undertaking for us as a state, but we're really happy this year for that to be underway and for us to have some of that initial data as a baseline with that required parent reporting. And we've made sure that parent reporting is very friendly and accessible for parents so that they are able to clearly understand where their child is and where they may need some extra support. Our third education agency priority is around math, and this is newer work for us. We've been working on literacy for the last several years and have really learned a lot about how to scale as a state and how to move educational outcomes around literacy. And so now we're planning the same thing around math education. And so we know that effective teaching of mathematics builds fluency of those mathematical procedures, leading to those increasing skills over time. So this begins with ensuring that our math teachers have the skills necessary to be their most effective in the classroom. So this past legislative session, we had two really important pieces of math legislation passed through. One was around a required training for math teachers in grades 4th through 8th. And so teachers next year will be required to take that math training, really ensuring that they know and understand the full breadth of vertical alignment of those math skills in order to prepare students for algebra and geometry in high school. And the other piece of that asked us to work with our teacher preparation programs to make sure that our teacher preparation candidates are really learning all of the math concepts necessary to make them their most effective at teaching our students math and identifying what their needs are. So we're excited about our new math work upcoming over the next several years. Our next agency priority focuses on opportunities to ensure a meaningful high school experience. We know that high school should be an environment where children are given the tools necessary to start making life decisions as they become young adults. And so we've been working to provide students with access to the courses they need for college and career readiness to lay that foundation for future success. Really working with stakeholders, with our school systems across the state to ensure that they have those local conversations with business and industry so that we are graduating students who have the skills, the credentials, the coursework, so that they can be successful in life beyond high school. Our next agency priority is around having an effective teacher for every single student. We know that outside of the family, that teacher in the classroom is the most important part of a child's education journey. And we know that teachers should be supported by strong school and strong school system leaders. And we know our teachers need to be relieved of some unnecessarily burdensome paperwork and duties so that they are free to teach. We're doing a few things in that regard, trying to identify what are maybe some unnecessary burdens that teachers do have that we may be able to free them from. We're also working on a new evaluation system for our educators that we hope to bring soon some policy to our board to really revitalize that evaluation system to make it really about supporting and growing our educators, giving them that good, strong feedback and that coaching support that they need to be their most effective. And then finally, we really believe in expanding educational choice for students and families. We know that families should have the right to choose the setting that's best for their child. in early childhood, this may look like an early childhood center, classroom. It may look like keeping the child home. If, you know, that's the opportunity and that's the choice of the family. We also know that in the K-12 setting, you know, families should have the right to choose the setting best for their child, whether that's a public, non-public, a public charter, or even homeschool opportunities. And so we want to make sure that that choice and that freedom is there for students and families, that they're able to make decisions about what works best for them. So those were just a few of our priorities that I wanted to highlight today, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thanks so much, Dr. Chiasson, for sharing this information about what's going on with the Department of Education, and also for reminding us that the Department of Education is not K-12, it's actually 0 to 12. That there's a significant amount of efforts, strategies, and resources in the early care and education arena. You also talked about basically a new Betsy board, some 8 out of 11 new members, which obviously will take the group dynamics, forming, storming, reforming, and norming. And also something that's huge, you talked about, Dr. Chiasson, this universal literacy screening, which is near and dear to our heart at United Way of Southeast Louisiana, and that we run the New Orleans campaign for grade level reading, which is spot on in terms of, you know, early education, quality, child care, quality care centers, and also understanding how important it is to negotiate reading by the end of 3rd grade. We always talk about, you know, between beginning school and 3rd grade, children learn to read. From then on, they read to learn. They hadn't negotiated reading, that provides significant difficulties. So this is huge. This universal literacy screening that's implemented at various times will give teachers and others a lot of information to promote reading. And thanks also for sharing your information about math, also looking at math and teacher preparation. And certainly you talked about the focus on choice for families and this community. Thanks again, Dr. Chiasson.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, it's now my pleasure to introduce to you Mariah Wineski. She has 19 years of experience working throughout the United States and internationally on social change campaigns, violence prevention, and curriculum development. She is currently chair of the Louisiana Domestic Violence Prevention Commission and previously served on the board of directors for Boulder Sister Cities. She is a fierce advocate fighting for victims of domestic violence, sexual assaults, and human trafficking. She has been at this for a long time and has had some successes. Please join me in welcoming Mariah Wineski.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, everybody. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here and thankful for United Way of Southeast Louisiana for the opportunity to share a little bit about LCADV and our legislative priorities this year. I am going to share, I have a few slides just to give you all some visuals. So give me just a second, I will share that. Okay. So as Ron said, I am the director of the Louisiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Just a little bit about who we are. LCADV is the federally designated statewide coalition of domestic violence shelters and advocacy organizations. We operate as a cohesive network of advocates all across the state and service providers as well. So our organization provides that unified voice for the anti-domestic violence movement in Louisiana. There is one domestic violence coalition that is federally designated in every state. And so we are that coalition for Louisiana, and coalitions serve a very unique role. They work to enhance and build the capacity of direct service organizations. So our work generally falls into 4 realms. We do legislative advocacy and policy development work. We provide training for advocates who work at shelters and also for systems-based professionals so that they can provide the best possible services for survivors of domestic violence. We build the capacity of local domestic violence organizations across the state. So we identify gaps and we work to build a comprehensive network of safety resources. And then we provide public education and social change work to help promote changes in attitudes and beliefs that will help individuals live free from violence. So we are at our core a membership organization, and our membership consists primarily of the domestic violence shelters across the state. So together, those shelters provide the vast majority of all services that are available to domestic violence survivors in Louisiana. This includes things like 24-hour hotlines, of course, emergency shelter, advocacy for children who are exposed to domestic violence, legal advocacy and representation to help keep survivors and their children safe, support groups, direct housing assistance, and so much more. A little bit of background about where we stand in Louisiana in terms of domestic violence. We unfortunately lead the nation in the rate of female homicide victimization, which of course, the vast majority of that is domestic violence homicide. Our rate of women murdered by men is nearly twice the national average in any given year. So if you look at this graph, you can see the green line is Louisiana's rate of female homicide victimization, and then the blue line is the national average. So that's only one metric, but it is consistent, unfortunately, with a lot of other metrics in Louisiana that indicate there is a vast unmet need for safety resources. We do have every year over 100 children that are left without a parent due to domestic violence homicide. So there are a lot of things that contribute to these high homicide rates in Louisiana, but one of the most glaringly obvious ones is the inadequate number of shelter beds and support services that are available to victims who need immediate safety, and victims and their minor children as well. So in 2021, in response to our consistently high homicide rates, the Louisiana Legislative Auditor conducted a performance audit of Louisiana's response to domestic violence. And its results confirmed what many of us have known for years, and that is that Louisiana does not adequately fund domestic violence victim services. And in this report, the legislative auditor recommended that the legislature allocate consistent and adequate funding for domestic violence services. Legislature did act on that, and in response to a tremendous advocacy campaign last year, they allocated $7 million in state general funds to domestic violence shelters in 2023. The funding was placed in the Department of Children and Family Services in the Division of Family Support, which is appropriate as they administer much of the current federal funding that the domestic violence shelters receive. The purpose and intent of this funding was to expand domestic violence services across the state in the areas with the highest unmet need. The results of this investment are tremendous. It is leading to 5 completely new shelters. It is leading to 6 expansions of bed capacity in existing shelters. Some shelters are expanding their capacity by up to 20 family rooms. So those two combined will result in the addition of 218 new shelter beds across Louisiana. So that means a safe haven for approximately 2,000 women and their children every year. In addition to the new shelter beds, we've established 11 new outreach offices in rural parishes, and these outreach offices can provide non-residential services for victims, help with restraining orders, support groups, other types of advocacy outside of shelter. And we've also invested in increases in child advocacy, counseling services, legal services, and intervention programs for those who perpetrate abuse as well. So despite all of this incredible progress, and despite DCFS's request to continue this vital funding, the executive budget unfortunately completely eliminates it this year. It proposes a very drastic cut, which will result in the immediate loss of all of these newly established services. Shelters will close, outreach offices will close, counseling and advocacy staff will be laid off, and we'll be right back where we were before this investment. So LCADV's legislative priorities for 2024 will be laser focused on restoring this vital funding for domestic violence services to the state budget. Our state really cannot afford to go backward when so many lives are at stake with this issue. So communities from Shreveport to Lake Charles to Slidell and everywhere in between will see shelters close and victims with nowhere to turn. And as has been the unfortunate reality for decades in our state, women and children will pay the highest price for this. So we certainly encourage all of you to join us in our efforts to restore this funding this year. We are going to be working tirelessly with our legislative champions and our partners over the next 4 months to ensure that all of these newly established services can continue and that our most vulnerable citizens can live to see the benefits of this investment. You know that the budget, of course, is only one piece of what will surely be a very busy legislative session. So outside of our funding efforts, LCADV will maintain our regular legislative priorities, which consist of promoting bills that ensure survivor access to both civil and criminal justice. We support legislation that prevents domestic violence homicides by focusing on promoting early accountability for perpetrators of abuse and survivor-centered criminal justice practices. We support legislation that promotes the economic stability of survivors because we know that there is no safety without economic security. And this includes things like paid family leave and pay equity, access to housing, pathways out of poverty, all of those things. We support legislation that promotes safe environments. So we work to create environments that prevent violence from occurring in the first place, right? We're focusing on healthy relationships, concrete supports for families, promoting gender equity, creating environments where individuals can live safely and thrive. So those are our priorities for this year. Thank you again for the opportunity, and thank you all for your advocacy, and I certainly hope that you'll join our efforts session.
Mariah, thanks so much for sharing this helpful information. That should challenge all of us to be a part of efforts to restore the cuts that you mentioned, significant cuts after having achieved real success in 2023, which allowed for a response to the critical needs like shelter, services, expansion of centers. And now we're looking at a possibility that all that will be wiped out. So, so it's real clear that United Way of Southeast Louisiana has been in this space for quite some time and has been a part, with the leadership of Charmaine, of course, and her team has been a part of some, significant legislative successes. And so our hope is that more people will join this effort to get those cuts restored. It's important, as Mariah mentioned, that people are dying. In fact, Louisiana leads the nation in those incidences of domestic violence that result in homicides. And so there's work to do. And I want to thank you again, Mariah, for sharing this information. It's now my pleasure to turn it back over to our awesome host, Todd Baptiste, who will open up today's program with questions we have received in the chat.
That's a lot of pressure, Ron. We have a few questions that came in the chat. The first question is directed to Judge David Matlock. The comment initially is, thank you for addressing staffing issues. Social workers need reasonable caseloads and adequate compensation, but they had a fundamental question. Do you consider hunger a form of child abuse and neglect? And what can we do to help parents who cannot afford to provide adequate nutrition because the Louisiana legislature failed to pass a minimum wage, an increase in earned income tax, and the governor declines federal funds for children?
In 28 and a half years on the bench, the juvenile bench, and largely focused on just child welfare, I saw child hunger empirically, and this is anecdotal based on my experience. There were benefits, and in those cases where there was genuine child hunger, there was a component of serious mental health issues, very serious, and of parents, and issues of treatment resistance, substance use, of those parents. It wasn't necessarily a resource issue. That having been said, there has been absolutely incredible inflation over the last relatively short span of time. I was told yesterday that in March, less than a year ago, a car would cost, that we were looking at because we have serious fleet problems, $28,000. It's now, I can't remember the specific number, but my recollection, it was high 30s. My mind just kind of went to the place of it had almost doubled, and that's probably an exaggeration, but close to doubled in less than a year. And so we have seen absolutely rampant inflation. And so that exists at the grocery level. I mean, I push the cart and I get it. And I don't know anybody. I certainly don't have close folks that want childhood hunger. It's a real thing, as are many others. I wanted to mention in those cases where I did see serious mental health issues and treatment-resistant substance abuse, as I would interview those parents, I would almost inevitably find out that they themselves had been a serious victim of very serious relational childhood trauma, with ladies very, very, very often sexual abuse at a very young age. What we did over a period of time in Shreveport was the first time a young mother or father, but it was very often the young mother, would come into court, we'd go back and have a little bench conference in the hallway with the lawyers, the caseworker, that mother, maybe a CASA, a court-appointed special advocate, maybe a counselor. And I would ask the mother, did something happen to you? And this was back in the 2016, 2017, roughly timeframe. And almost inevitably, we were just shocked to know how ubiquitous, how serious that serious relational childhood, sexual, and exposure to violence, also huge, particularly with young men. Imagine being a 5 or 6 year old young man watching someone physically abuse your mother and not be able to do anything about it. What is that? The anger, the frustration, the everything. It's just incredibly traumatic. And those young parents, a 28-year-old mother sitting there sharing me something to me, is just the 8-year-old sitting in the courtroom on the other side of the door 20 years later. I mean, it was just the same child. It was intergenerational. And but in some of those situations, that's where I saw genuine hunger. I will say, given the very recent inflation, it's a different ballgame today. And we need to try to address that. Some of that, and I honestly, I'm absolutely done with generational poverty traps and benefit cliffs. And I do know, as I said early on, the best social program, often, it's not the only one, and it's maybe in a lot of circumstances not the most important one, but the best social program is a job. That general idea of that you're creating a pathway out through workforce development, economic development, which go hand in hand. They're different, but they go hand in hand. And I'm also, honestly, I mean, I'm an old man. I'm done with spending money we don't have, leaving our grandchildren with debts that they're not going to be able to pay, and creating more inflation and greater poverty. And I want long-sighted solutions. I want things that
Are there things that we can do as a community, or as the government? What can the government do?
Well, we're actually trying to work with local governance in New Orleans to address specifically this coming summer some very specific food-related issues to this issue, trying to leverage and build connections and so forth. And Ali Rao, who I want to make sure, and honestly, Mariah, jumping a little bit here, please reach out to me. And I'm hesitant to share I would happily share my personal cell or my work cell number with any and all of y'all. You mentioned this is being recorded, and so I don't know the proliferation of that, but I'm happy to share it. And if any of y'all have it, please share it among yourselves in in a better forum. But Mariah, you and I need to talk. And I don't know if you know Christy. I got too many. Again, it's too many people.
And we have
Christy,
a couple other questions that we want to
I'm
get
sorry.
to.
I'll
So
try
if
to be
you would,
quiet.
yeah.
All right, I'm sorry.
Okay, well, thank you for your response, Secretary. I have a question now. It's directed to Dr. Jenna Chiasson. The question is, what specific efforts are in place to promote project-based education for high school level career skill training?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll go ahead and drop a resource in the chat from our website, but I think I think the best answer to that is our Fast Forward program. And our Fast Forward program really is about ensuring that we have pathways for students to take dual enrollment credits or for them to participate in pre-apprenticeship or apprenticeship programs to earn credentials and credits in coursework to prepare them for jobs in industry here in our state. So I'll go ahead, I'll drop that in the chat because I think that would be of interest, more information about our Fast Forward program.
Okay, thank you. And we have one other question. It is directed to Mariah. It states, what concrete steps are being taken by government leaders in Louisiana to address the complex challenges of domestic violence, including prevention, intervention, and support for survivors? And how can collaborative efforts between government agencies, community organizations, and law enforcement be enhanced to provide more comprehensive solutions? It's a loaded question.
That is a big question. I can address some pieces of it. I will say that we have been blessed in Louisiana to have widespread support on many domestic violence related initiatives, and that is both at the legislative level and also at the administrative level, right? In a lot of areas of state government. And so I think that everyone understands how big of an issue this is and the importance of it. I think that a lot of the issues that we face are systemic, right? Much like they are at DCFS and any other place. I think that we are trying to make big systemic changes to a system that has been under-resourced for decades. And that's difficult, right? I think a lot of positive partnerships have established lately between private entities, nonprofits that are our membership, and state entities as well. And so we talk about kind of creating this wraparound system for survivors and their children and breaking that intergenerational cycle of abuse, right? We see so often, and we've been at this long enough to where we have seen that the children that we served 15, 20 years ago in a shelter are back as adult survivors, or that we find that they are arrested for perpetrating abuse, right? And so the more that we can work together in terms of connecting our services with other services that a family might need to help break that cycle, then the better off we're going to be. Because I say we've seen a lot of the negative effects, but we've also seen tremendous success stories and families truly getting out of these cycles of abuse and living safe, stable lives. I don't know if I think that addressed part of the question. I don't know if it addressed all of it, but partnerships really are key. And I think that the nonprofits and the local community-based domestic violence organizations play an incredibly important role. And they can do things that many government entities cannot do for a family, right? We have the ability to serve families in a very holistic way. And without a lot of the red tape that they might find. I say often to the advocates that work in a shelter, I said, look, remember, we are not the DMV, right? We are not here to say you can do this, this, and this only if you bring us this, this, and this, right? So we're not here to put up barriers to serving survivors. We're here to give them what they need and to help them get safe. So.
Well, thank you very much, Mariah. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Charmaine Cacciopi. Charmaine Cacciopi has a focus on public policy, governmental affairs, and community impact. A career at United Way of Southeast Louisiana has included the successful advocating of the first ever EITC state match, passage of the child care tax credit, implementing statewide high-quality early child care rating system, a fierce champion in the fight against domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. She has fought tirelessly to secure state funding for Louisiana 211 Information Referral and Crisis Management Service, early care and education, safe schools, paid family leave, and breast cancer survivor services. It gives me great pleasure to turn the mic over to Charmaine Cacciopi.
Well, thank you, Todd. I especially want to again thank our esteemed panelists for joining with us today. Thank you, Secretary David Matlock. Thank you, Deputy Superintendent Jenna Chiasson. And thank you, my dear friend and fellow advocate Mariah Wineski, for your participation in today's program. Thank you to the participants who have joined in and who are engaged in this exciting initiative to really explore what we need to develop as our priorities. And as I close out today's program, I'd like to especially let everyone participating today know that United Way of Southeast Louisiana's public policy team advocates year-round. And we look to secure the kind of advancement in both public policy and programs that will help to achieve our mission of eradicating poverty. As you can see from today's program, we pride ourselves in working collaboratively across all sectors of government to advance bipartisan policies in health, education, financial stability, community strengthening, to create opportunities to help vulnerable households thrive across Louisiana. Together, we can create truly equitable communities, and we need for each of you who are here with us today to remain engaged. Please continue to work with the United Way of Southeast Louisiana's public policy team throughout the legislative session and help to advance our legislative priorities. You can access and register for our policy alerts and to engage in developing a stronger education on what we're going to be advocating for by going to the United Way's website, unitedwaysoutheastlouisiana.org. I would like to end today's program with thanking Michael Williamson, the President and CEO of United Way, Ron McLean, our Public Policy Chairman, Todd Batiste, Senior Vice President of Education and Youth Initiatives, Pam Allison, Director of Public Policy and Community Impact. We celebrate and appreciate our community impact partners and our community impact staff, communications and marketing team who helped to facilitate today's program. We look forward to engaging with all of you as we work to achieve a successful legislative session. This concludes our program, and we hope that each of you have a tremendous weekend. Thank you.